Welcome to Deconstructing with Melody. I'm your host, Melody Lococo, a certified functional medicine health and wellness coach. Today, we will start deconstructing our own internal family with our guest, who is a certified level 3 trained internal family systems practitioner. She works with groups as well as individuals as they explore their own inner world. She believes that using IFS as a way of seeing the world can have a profound impact on the individual as well as the community at large. She will be sharing how an unfortunate car accident led her to seek physical healing. And in return, she also found profound emotional healing from past abuse through internal family systems therapy. Let's welcome our guest, level 3 trained IFS practitioner, Alison Dyer. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into our show. I am here with Alison Dyer, and we can't wait to get started with our show. So let's dive in. Alison, would you like to share a little bit about your journey into well-being, what that looked like before to how it looks now?
I would love to. Thanks for having me on your podcast. This is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
I'm 60 and I've been on this journey since my early 20s. I started therapy. I have a history of childhood physical and sexual and emotional abuse,
Mhm.
and I was struggling with some pretty severe depression.
Yeah.
And so I actually started at that point, kind of towards my wellness in my journey. And I had an amazing therapist. And how I look at it now from my perspective is he actually put me in like this really safe cognitive box, right? He kind of gave me parameters of which to live and be and think. So I'm truly grateful for that. And as we go into IFS, I'm going to refer back to that because what I realize now is that he really strengthened my manager parts, which again I will explain as we go on. So when I got married, I had kids. It wasn't until my 30s that I started remembering my childhood abuse. So I was back into therapy. And my main goal at that time was to not hurt my kids.
Yeah.
So that box that I got from my therapist, I was still seeing him, was even stronger because I did not want to hurt my children. So my managers got pretty strong about keeping me in check, which I'm extremely grateful for.
Mhm.
When we moved from Southern California to Spokane 19 years ago, we had been here a week and a half, and my nephew at 18 committed suicide.
Mm.
I didn't know anybody. We just moved here. Um, so I found another therapist, a trauma therapist, and she was amazing. And she started kind of bringing in my body and acknowledging that our bodies hold traumatic memories.
Mhm.
And that was an eye opener for me. About, um, a year and a half in 2002, my husband and I were in a car accident and I had a whiplash. I had some spinal injuries, and I ended up really hurting my right hip to where I've had 5 surgeries on my hip and my shoulder. I've had one on my shoulder, which includes 3 major surgeries, a hip replacement, and 2 partial revisions.
Wow.
And so that really put me into connection with my body in a way I never really wanted to be honest.
Yeah.
But I was left with chronic groin pain. And as a sexual abuse survivor, that was a huge trigger for me. And I remember feeling like I just wanted to crawl out of my own skin. The pain was unbearable for a few years. Um, the memories of my body was having its memories were really strong and really intense. And my next door neighbor actually started to go see the therapist I see now, Brenda, because she's also trained in cranial sacral work. So I went to see her for cranial sacral work. First thing out of my mouth was, I don't want to do therapy on my sexual abuse stuff. I'm done with that. I just want to focus on my hip. Well, Brenda's an IFS certified IFS therapist. Within a week or two, we were starting to do IFS,
Mhm.
um, which at the time, I think a couple of years, actually, Melody, I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of. Like, what do you mean parts? What does this mean? This is dumb. I don't like it.
Mhm.
And I noticed that there was profound healing occurring with my memories of abuse, which I really had not dealt with at all.
Mhm.
I said I'd strengthen manager parts to where I could function, but
Yeah.
I had not addressed the pain of the memories that were being held. So that's kind of how I got. So I look at really my before and after is before IFS and after IFS,
Mhm.
because it wasn't until IFS that I was able to heal in genuine, profound ways to where I'm no longer triggered. I no longer feel like I have to crawl out of my own skin. I still have pain, but it's not a trigger for me. Um,
Yeah.
I've made peace with that more or less. Wintertime's hard because my pain is up. So I don't love it, but
Mhm.
it's not a trigger for me. Um,
Wow. That's
so that
so
was
profound to know that, working through your body and what your body went through, and then putting it with, uh, you went for body therapy
Mhm.
and coming out knowing that you're able to untraumatize those parts of your body as well as your emotions and find that freedom and that healing.
Mhm. Yeah, it was profound. It
Wow.
continues. I'm still on that journey. I still um, do my own personal work, which I will until I die. Um,
Mhm.
it's an amazing process of becoming aware of waking up
Mhm.
in a really deep way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel I had kind of a time in my life where I had to wake up and I felt like I was forced to focus on my body and what my body needed. And at first I was like, no, like I hate this. I'm uncomfortable. But I have found that as I've listened to my body and how it responds to things, I find what it needs and I find so much healing. And but it's uncomfortable, especially, because I've turned off a lot of parts of me that are trying to communicate that I need help, but I've turned a lot of those off or ignored them, really is, I think, the right word.
Mhm.
Um, so, wow, what a powerful story of you being able to take a very scary and traumatic event as a car accident and the injuries to your body and how that triggered, that pathway for you.
Mhm.
So speaking a little more about IFS, do you mind sharing a little bit more of what IFS is, and diving into that with us?
I'd love to. I love IFS. IFS was started. It's short for Internal Family Systems, and Dick Schwartz kind of came up with this in the '80s. He was trained in family therapy, and he was noticing with his really traumatized clients, like typically teenage girls, when he would work with the family as a whole. And family therapists at that time thought psychologists who kind of dove deep inside were kind of pointless. So the family therapist at the time really focused on the external family and the relationship. So in his mind, when you heal the family unit, whatever a teenager's acting out, that should just go away because the family unit has been healed and those repairs have been made. Well, he found out that didn't really work.
Mhm.
So in particular, he was working with this one teenager who was self-harming, a part that showed up as a self-harm, and really worked with her, saying, stop, don't do this, and why are you doing this, and tried to come up with all sorts of external contracts to not do it. And finally this part said, fine, I won't, I won't cut anymore. Well, when she came back the next day, her whole face had been sliced open.
Wow.
And Dick finally just said, you know what, I give up. I don't want to fight you anymore. And the clients responded, well, I don't want to fight you either. And so he really started listening to how his clients were talking, and they were using parts. They were coming to him saying, a part of me wants to cut and hurt myself. I have another part of me that hates it when I do that. I have another part, if you use eating disorders, I have another part that wants to restrict my eating or overeat, another part that doesn't. So as he was listening, he just kind of got curious about these different parts, and he just would start asking those parts questions. Why do you do this? Why do you show up in this way? And to his huge surprise, he was getting answers and they were making sense. And the client was able to make sense of it. And then another part would show up and he would get curious about that and have the conversation. And then he also started noticing that a different part would show up. And this part really was more calm. And there was a genuine curiosity in it. And it didn't seem to be involved in the emotional issues of these other parts. And so when Dick would say, well, what part of you is up now? Which part is talking? They would say, it's not a part, it's myself. This is the essence of me. So he used the word self. He really got all this language from his clients.
Mm-hmm.
Parts, the self, because that's how his clients identified their own internal world. So he kind of spent like at least 5 years really kind of being puzzled by this and kind of confused and also like what have I kind of stepped onto. And then he also realized that he also had this internal family, and he called it internal family because that was his training, was external families.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was seeing was there was the same dynamic going on inside. There's these sub personalities, sub parts that had their own stories, their own experiences. They showed up in the body in different ways. um, so he just more and more got kind of curious, and he found out with self that every one of his clients had this self, and this self seemed to not get hurt by the past, really seemed to be undamaged. But what he noticed was, especially for trauma, which is what he worked with, those parts would show up. If you have a child who's traumatized, these other parts would show up and they would take out the self because the parts were protecting the self, is how he kind of came to understand it. So the more he kind of worked with these parts, he came up with three different names for them. There's a manager part, and their job is to more, their energy is more running life, running the show. Like they will help you go to school, they will help you show up in your job. They're more proactive in keeping you moving forward, right? Like when I was talking about my managers getting strong with my box I created, I had very strong managers that just kept me moving, that would show up looking completely normal, that would be fine. I had other firefighter parts, and the firefighter energy is more kind of what it sounds. They're going to immediately come in and take and almost overreact when they're extreme. So for me, it was eating disordered or some cutting. That was an extreme reaction. When the managers weren't able to run my life, the firefighters would show up.
Mm-hmm.
It can also show up in not such huge ways. You can check out on Netflix. You can become addicted to video games. Anything that kind of takes you out and disconnects you with that energy is what he called a firefighter. The exiles were those parts of us that don't really have a job, but they hold the pain. So when you are hurt as a child, if you have a sexual abuse or an emotional misattunement, and you have feelings of shame or intense anger, that's the exile. And the manager parts and the firefighter's job is to protect the client, you, from the feelings of these exiles from coming into your life and interfering. So they want to keep these exiles from your conscious. Oftentimes, our exiles live in the unconscious because they hold those intense memories.
Mm-hmm.
And so he realized after years of working with these clients that there seemed to be a pretty consistent pattern in how these parts would show up. And as time grew on, the whole model kind of grew and expanded and has evolved over time. This is a bare bones kind of how it got started. Explanation of IFS.
Yeah.
If you want more information, I really encourage you to go to the website.
Yeah, I'll have that in the show notes below if anyone's wanting to look more into IFS therapy and how that looks for you, and just to get a little curious about it. I feel like I had a similar response to you, Allison, when my sister actually, who was talking about her IFS counselor, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what's parts? This sounds weird. Like, I don't know. I'll only see this other type of counselor. and how, man, I'm so glad I took that jump, because I feel like I went from 0 to like 100 and learning about myself. And some of you on this show know a little bit about my story, as I was seeing multiple counselors sometimes at a time, and I would hit this wall and I just couldn't move forward. And I just felt like I wasn't getting where I wanted to go. And it wasn't until IFS therapy that I was able to move forward emotionally. Although it feels like, I had a doctor one time say on my healing journey, it's the slow boat to China, like just the little rowboat to China from here to there, because it takes so long, but you just keep moving forward, and you'll find what you're looking for. I think one of my favorite parts about IFS has been me, like as a client, I've been able to lead the show. So I've been able to say where I'm ready and willing to talk about, where I'm ready and willing to go, without feeling like I'm being coerced to start talking about a specific situation. I go with where I feel I need to go at that time, and just trusting that what comes up is what I need to process through, or that I can acknowledge it. I know that's been a completely different experience for me than the other counseling techniques I've experienced, was that I get to lead and I have a support, asking good questions, or just helping me to unblend and breathe through those situations.
Yeah, it is very profound. And that's a good point, because the client really is in charge. You are in charge of your own relationship. And one of the things that I think is so different about IFS is, as a practitioner, my job is to facilitate the client's self to part relationship. It's not my job to fix my clients, to try and figure it out for them. My job is to hold as much of my own self energy in the process, and especially help them when they don't have that available. Then they can kind of lean into my energy. But really, it's to help their parts get introduced to their own self energy, because the self can actually heal
Yes.
those parts. That is the huge shift and difference. And when you even look at self, if you want to go even a bit larger with that, it's a really spiritual way of looking at life. Because when you talk about the self, if you want to bring in the religious language, it's the soul, it's the spirit. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different world religions have this intuitive understanding that we all have this divineness to us. We all have this essence of divine. And so with IFS language, it's the self.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they use. But in other religions, it is the soul, it's the spirit, and it's always available. I think with IFS, it makes it a little bit easier to access, or not so ethereal,
Mm-hmm.
um, when you realize it's just a part of who you are.
Yeah. Great point. Great point. And some of the things that you were explaining a little bit about, that true self, some of the words you were saying, like calm and compassionate. Do you want to dive in a little bit more into those truths of who we are, and how we can access those a bit?
Yeah. Well, with Richard Schwartz, he kind of came up with he calls them the 8 C's, and I have them right here, so I'm going to be looking at them because I don't have them memorized.
Mhm.
It's calm, clarity, compassion, curiosity, confidence, courage, compassion, and connection. And that's by no means an exhaustive list. That's just kind of what the bare bones, kind of the words that he kind of came up with, that seemed to fit what he was noticing when people were able to show up in their self.
Mhm.
And if I'm hearing your question, what you want to know more how to access the self, or more information about what that looks like with IFS and the journey, is that what you were asking?
Yeah. So yeah, how would, I guess my question is, if I am brand new and I'm coming to you and I want to know, like if I want to make a decision and I want to make it in my adult self, like I would say, and outside of trauma, and if I want to feel calm and curious, how do I access that part of me when
Mhm.
I'm not sure how to?
Right. That's a great question. One of the easiest things for me, and one of my big go-tos, is I start out, if I'm doing my own work or if I'm with clients, of just naming and noticing what parts are up, right? Like if you were to come to me, I want to make this decision, one of my first curiosities would be, so what are you noticing is up for you? And you might say, well, I'm noticing a part of me that's feeling really nervous about this, but I'm also noticing a part that's like really excited and wanting me just to go for it.
Mm.
So I would start there. And just by noticing, so I might say, okay, so I'm noticing this part of you that's really excited and another part of you that's feeling really nervous about it. So, what is it like for those parts of you to hear me say, to acknowledge them out loud? And what's it like for those parts to have you notice them? Because when you start noticing your parts, that brings in self energy. Because who's doing the noticing is what you want to get curious about, right? Typically self, although it can be a self-like part, which is another conversation, but typically for this podcast, the self is noticing what parts are up. And another way that I know when I am more in self than not, and you can just take a sliver of self, you don't have to be like fully in self, which I'm not even sure is possible for most of life. But when I feel more expansive inside, when I feel like I have more room inside, when I do feel calm, that for me tells me that I have enough self energy on board that I can really start conversing with these parts of me.
Mhm.
Self does not have the energy of an agenda except for wanting to bring wholeness. If you're in a part, there will be an energy of doing something, especially if you're in a manager part. I want to do something to fix this. I want to do something to not feel this way. Or a firefighter energy. I want to be taken out. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm going to watch Netflix. I'm going to read a book. There's a different intent and energy, but both are distracting, right? Where
Mhm.
self, it's just that feeling of just spaciousness.
Mhm.
Is the best way for me to describe it. And really, the easiest way is just to start noticing your own thoughts, noticing your feelings, noticing what's going on in your body, and just get curious about that. What
Yeah.
is their story? What do they want you to know? Why are they showing up now? And just start asking those questions to those parts of you, and you will get an answer.
Mhm.
And you start the conversation that way.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I first started my IFS journey, it was just say hi. Just
Mm,
say hi to those parts. But even before that, because on this show, we're talking about awareness, like how to be aware. And so a lot of times I think of myself growing up and I would just be like, I felt like sometimes just taken over by an emotion.
mhm,
I kind of look at parts of just different emotions, and that kind of helped me just to grab a little bit of what that looked like for me. And so when the first step was becoming aware of how I am feeling at the time. So I loved what you had said, you might have an excited part and a nervous part, and they're together. And just one of the things that I have done in that awareness is I call it like emotion mapping, where I just um, start drawing. And typically, I'm a very creative and visual person. So I can like see little parts of me or little characters, and I'll just draw what I'm seeing in my mind. And I'll just start saying, well, this one's anger, and this one's being afraid, and this one's sad, and this one's happy, and this one's, and I would just start writing dialogues of what they were saying. And it really helped me look at the big picture of like, especially in overwhelm. And I feel overwhelmed all the time. And that's when I feel like all these parts are
mhm.
listen to me, listen to me, listen to me, like, hey. And whoa, and of course, you have your 3-year-old in the background, listen to me, I need a snack. And it's like, I can't. And so I found that for myself a lot was feeling like with my kids, like feeling like they were interrupting me, even when I wasn't doing much, but they were interrupting my overwhelm in my mind. And it felt loud in here. And so with their one question, I noticed I would just react. And then I'd be like, why am I reacting to that? Like, they're just asking, like, and so I felt similar when you had said, in your 30s, after you had kids, you kind of started reliving some of your trauma, and you didn't want to hurt your kids. I feel like I resonate so much with that part of your story, because that's when I feel like my trauma kind of, like, I already knew I had it, but it just felt like it was amplified and I just really needed help. And so, yeah, I love the awareness of just finding what we're feeling and just saying, I see you.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
that was so powerful for me on my journey.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. And sometimes I found when I'm overwhelmed, it helps to, I do a lot of journaling too, but sometimes just picking objects in my house. Like I have a bunch of stuffed animals for my 8-year-old parts, and I will pull them out and I will say, okay, this stuffed animal represents fear. This other one represents another feeling. And I will put them around in my house, kind of intuitively feel where do they want to be in relation to each other. And that's another way of mapping. And it's another way of getting space from your own parts, which is another way of bringing in self,
Mm.
right? It again goes back to your word awareness. When you're aware of a part, you already are starting the unblending process. And it gives you a little bit of room to kind of really take a look. It's going back to kids. It's, my kids were little, they're 30s now, but when they would be like so upset and they would like leech onto my person, like they wanted to crawl inside and I couldn't see them. There was no connection. So I would kind of pull them away a little bit. They'd still be in my lap so I could make eye contact. And as soon as I was able to get them to look at me and make eye contact, they would start to relax, even just a little bit. So I kind of think of that when I have a lot of parts that are really up or an exile pain that's really intense. I'll have this image in my mind of a little child who's having just really, really upset. And I'll just visually imagine me pulling them out just a little bit and can look at me. I
Mhm.
need you to give me just a little bit of room so I can help you. I don't want them to go away. That's never the message. It's I can't help you if you are this close. And I really do want to get to know you. I really do want to understand why you're upset. And
Mhm.
that also can be really calming for those overwhelmed parts.
Yeah, I love that, because it brings us back to being in the present time.
Mhm.
So when you said you had those animals laid out or objects in your home laid out, that it, and you could pick it up and hug it and
Yeah.
then give it that space, and then and giving you that space to be in the present time is that awareness, like, I am presently noticing all of these parts showing up. But I feel like for me, if when I don't do that, I'm living in my past, I'm living
Right.
in my trauma on repeat.
Right.
And like you said, with a child, like, I mean, if I imagine my daughter standing here trying to talk to me, and I'm just like, no, I can't hear, I can't hear. Like, how long could I do that for? And I did that for so many years to so many parts of me. And, when we look at our child and we look and we engage and just say, I see you, you see them start to just melt, like, mom is here, mom
Right.
sees me. And I love with IFS, it feels like I'm here to parent myself, or to save myself and be what I always had within me, and to access that um, really brings that awareness and brings us into the present moment, which is, I believe, the first huge step to healing, when we are present with ourselves and gain that awareness.
Well, and piggybacking on that, a lot of times, which this was a really big surprise to me, but a lot of times those parts of me that felt young and were young, they didn't know that I had grown up, because when you have trauma memories, those memories are stuck in the past. So when I would get activated, especially when I started working with the exiles and their protectors, because protectors really show up like seconds after an original harm. So they're often very young. So they don't know that I'm as old as I am.
Mm-hmm.
Their perspective is they're still 8 years old. So their fear is just like it happened at the time. So when I can go back in self and have them see me as the adult have them update them as to my life, then I can bring them out of the past. I can listen to their story. I can hear their pain from a place of self. I can heal that and allow them to take on different beliefs and different roles. And I think that's why, for me, the change is so profound and it's so lasting. Because for me, the talk therapy was wonderful in that it kept me in that box, but it's a lot of mental work. I was exhausted
Yeah.
talking myself out of my own trauma. I don't have to do that anymore. My 8-year-old parts that held so much pain are now up in the present. They're with me. I created this whole imaginary garden and beach for them, and they're fine. They bring different energy into my life. They don't have to hold on to the pain and
Mhm.
the shame and the beliefs that there's something really wrong with them. They don't have that anymore. They are 8-year-old healthy little girls with creativity and energy and playfulness and all those things that kids hold. They're now a part of me and bring that to my life because they're not in the past anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know all the neuroscience, but I know that there's been lots of studies with brain imaging now, and it really does change your neural pathways when you do this type of deep work. And that's why they're finding it works, because you're rewiring your brain and those neurons, and the trauma lives in that reptilian part of your brain, and that gets rewired, which
Mhm.
is why the change is so profound and lasting. It's really, that part is fascinating, but I don't know enough about it to be an expert for sure. I'm just a little bit of a geek,
Yeah.
an
No,
amateur geek.
I love that language too, because you're right. And the ability our bodies have to rewire our brain is nothing but a miracle. Like,
Right.
we were created with that design already in us to be able to rewire. And as we talk a little bit, some of my functional medicine language is coming to mind when we're in that fight and flight stage.
Yeah.
Our body responds to fight and flight.
Mhm.
And we do some breathing techniques to get us to that present moment, to help with that, to activate, to get us into that, rest and digest state. But I love that IFS just goes so much with that, because when we work through those emotional traumas and heal and give our burden parts new jobs, we're able to remove that part, at least from that fight or flight, and into
Right.
a rest and digest. And it's just slowly, as we are unburdening those, that our body, I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but our body starts to feel better.
Mhm.
And things that, I truly believe in the trapped traumas in different parts of our bodies that you had shared earlier, and would love to hear more on that at another time. Like, that somatic therapy
Yeah.
is just, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh,
It really is.
yeah. So thank you for sharing that. So my question is, if somebody hasn't really stepped into or isn't aware that they maybe need help, or if they're starting to think about it, what's something that you could share with us about taking that first step into getting help? Maybe it's connecting with ourselves so that we feel like we have that energy to move forward. Maybe it's I'm just trying to clarify my question as I asked. I'm not sure if if you understand where I'm going.
I think so. I think if you're in a place of big trauma, um, then definitely reach out to help. You can go to the IFS Institute if you're interested in that, and they have a page of practitioners and therapists. And they list it by state. So you
Mhm.
can go to your state and find somebody that might be able to help you. That would be a really good first step. Um, if you're in a really bad place, then calling 911 or something like that to get some
Yeah.
help. But if you're just kind of starting out, I go back to that, just that curiosity, and just starting to notice what thoughts that you have, what feelings you have, what are you noticing in your body, and maybe journaling it out if you like to journal, or draw it out, and just simply notice it, and notice what it's like to have those parts of you to be noticed.
Mhm.
Again, you don't have to do anything to change those parts, because another thing that with those parts, they're not going to change their job. they're not going to change how they show up in your life until the exile that they're protecting is healed. So to ask yours or to expect you yourself to change is really not going to happen, right? So if you're noticing a part that you don't like, try and see if you can bring in a little bit of curiosity and compassion towards that part of you. Another thing I love about IFS, a couple of things, is all parts are welcome, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the critic, the part that seems to be really destructive, all of them are welcome. And they have your best interest at heart. So sometimes it feels and seems counterintuitive, especially if they're destructive and hurtful. But if you remember that they're most likely little kids stuck
Yeah.
in the past, doing a job they're not really equipped to do, and they're really trying to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
That is what they are doing. And if you can remember that and just start slowly changing that conversation you have with yourself and start just reminding yourself, okay, these parts are working for my benefit. And just see if you can't bring in some curiosity
Mm-hmm.
to your own internal conversations and your own internal dialogue, including your body.
Yeah. I I love that. Thank you for answering that. It reminded me of a part I had, my anger or my rage part that would show up. And I had so many that were like, I hate that part. Like that part needs to be quiet. It needs to stop. And it wasn't until it was like, okay, I see you. And I was like, well, what are you trying to do? And it was like, well, Melody, you're not being heard. Your kids aren't listening to you. I need to get loud so they'll listen. And I'm like, oh, well, and breaking that down and trying to see, well, where did that come from? And oh, it came from, when I was an infant and I would cry and I wasn't getting picked up and I wasn't being heard and my needs weren't met. And then I was like, whoa, that goes all the way back to then. And being able to, okay, so how can we, and taking those steps to befriend the parts of you that you hate
Right,
and learning about why they're even there.
right.
And so I love that language, Allison. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Because it's hard work. It's hard work. And
Hard.
it's flipping that script in your mind of what you once thought to what is.
Well, I think for a lot of folks, myself included, this idea of multiplicity of subpersonalities and parts is kind of crazy sounding, especially in our society where you have a dissociative identity disorder, which is one of my diagnoses, and it sounds like you're unhealthy. And so for me, one of my biggest shifts was this understanding that multiplicity is actually pretty normal, that all of us have different parts, whether you've had trauma or not. And if you start thinking about even going to the grocery store, notice those conversations that you're having in your head. You walk past some ice cream. Man, I really want that ice cream. Another part pops up. No, that's
Mm.
not good for you. So just start noticing those different points of view that you hold and get curious just even about those. And what is the concern, even if for the part that wants you to have ice cream and the part that doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
What's their story? And that was probably for me with IFS one of the hardest shifts for me to accept because it was a diagnosis I had that felt negative. And
Yeah.
that's another thing I really, really like about IFS. It's a non-pathologizing. You look at somebody's part, whether it be addictions or extreme behaviors or whatever it is, and the intent behind it is good and it's not bad. There are no bad parts. They're doing jobs that they don't want to do,
Yeah.
surviving situations that were really almost impossible to survive. So it's a really creative way of surviving trauma, especially. But it takes the stigma out of it. Um, because even before I had parts, I felt crazy because I had so many polarized parts of me. I felt a little nutty.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started understanding, well, these are just different parts of me, it actually helped me feel a lot more sane.
Yeah.
And it became normalized.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. And for my experience too. Well, as we're wrapping up, I have a question for some of us that maybe feel I can't address what I'm feeling, because once I do, I'm going to be so overwhelmed, and I'm going to, it's the fear of being aware, of what I'm feeling, because it's so much. And what if it tells me stories that I don't like, or I don't know if I want to know my past. I don't know if I really want to go there because it's scary. So I'm just going to keep. What sort of encouragement or support do you have for someone who's facing that?
Well, that's a great question because I totally relate to that. Our parts can be really overwhelming. And I think I go back to just getting curious in a way of saying hi. Like I use this image often for myself and with clients is imagine a part, you're seeing them across the street. So there's some distance away and just wave and say hi. You don't have to engage. You don't have to do anything. Just start by practicing slowly in a way that is safe enough. And then I think to get curious about those parts that are really afraid to even go there, start there in that place again, just simply being curious. And another thing that Dick found out that for the most part I think is true. I've been overwhelmed before. Most of the time, if you ask those parts to not overwhelm you, they won't. But sometimes I found for myself it comes after there's been a relationship with self to parts. So, for those who are holding a lot of trauma and have felt overwhelmed in the past, I really recommend you get help. Having somebody hold that self energy in that space for you so you can proceed in a way. Because my parts didn't trust myself, they trusted my therapist self
Mhm.
way before they trusted me.
Yeah.
So, being able to find somebody to hold that space for you is really crucial. And then just going really, really slowly um, of just waving and just saying to these parts of you, I'm not going to push back. I'm not going to go farther than you want me to go. If you don't feel like it's safe for me to look at my past, I'm not going to look at my past. That's
Mhm.
a way of honoring those protector parts. And that in and of itself will help them to relax. Because
Mm.
that's one of the tenets with IFS that I'm like a stickler on is you do not push past your protector parts. You do not ask them to do something they're not ready to do.
Mhm.
That's when you get the backlash because it's not safe. So if a protector tells me, I don't want you to go there, I'm going to pay attention and I'm not going to go there. I
Mhm.
will hang out with that protector part and just get to know that part in a way that is safe.
Yeah. I love that you said that you don't push past it. I took a breath of air at that moment, because just reminding myself,
Mhm.
it just feels so reassuring to know, like, I don't have to go where I'm not comfortable. I have done that my whole life and ignored uncomfortable situations.
Right?
I am with myself. I can choose boundaries. I can choose well being. I can choose where I go and where I don't. And my body and my parts are going to tell me that. They're going to be like,
Right.
I'm uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, I'll just sit
Okay.
here.
Yeah. And what a great message for those parts of us who have when you're abused, you don't have choice, you don't have
Mhm.
agency. So what in effect you're doing is you're giving your parts choice and agency.
Yes. Yes. I
It's
love
huge.
it. It is huge. It is huge. So thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else you'd like the audience to know, or that you would like to share? Any awareness, your favorite technique? Um, you just let me know. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think really my favorite technique is really just going back to that just simple, that curiosity and just noticing what you're noticing.
Hmm.
I think that's such a great way to start to
Yeah.
just simply notice what you're noticing with some curiosity is my go-to.
Hmm.
If I can be curious about something, there's usually not a judgment attached to it. If I'm genuinely curious,
Yeah.
I
I
find that
love
to be
that.
really helpful.
I've taken that aspect from you too. I'm curious why I'm doing this. So very great language. So, okay. So how can we find you? How can we connect with you if we're wanting to ask you more questions, or, see if you're a good fit to be a practitioner for us, anyone here in the audience? How can we find you?
A couple of ways. My email. Are you putting that in the chat notes or
Yeah, I
should I
can
just
put
say
that in the show notes. Mhm.
okay? And also there's a website, it's should be in the chat notes, the Parts Work Practice. It's www.partsworkpractice. I co-facilitate a couple of groups that are free on Wednesday, 5:30, no, 5 o'clock Pacific time, and Sunday, 9:30 Pacific time. And those are free. And we're going through Bonnie Weiss's Parts Work Practice or Therapy. It's just a basic understanding IFS and getting curious about parts. And we're just starting over. We're going to go through the book again twice. That would be a really good way to get your feet wet. Doesn't cost anything. You're going to meet a bunch of other people that love IFS as well. And my email, I do want to really stress that I am a certified IFS practitioner, and I'm not a licensed therapist. So it's more like a coach. I don't have license through the state. I just want to make that clear. The training for IFS practitioners and therapists for IFS is exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's just not the licensing. So
Good to know. Thanks for clarifying.
yeah.
Well, wonderful. Allison, I loved sharing this time with you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this space and for sharing your story. I feel honored to be able to hear it, as well as I know our audience is too. So thank you so much. And again, anybody go ahead and look at the show notes below for any further information to connect with Allison. I definitely encourage you to take those steps and join those free groups just to check it out and see what it's like. So thank you for that opportunity for us.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun. I enjoy talking. I love talking about IFS, and it's been a treat for me as well.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll have you back on.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If this episode encouraged you or supported you along your journey, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel because we have so many wonderful and free tools just for you.